What's going on, everybody? You're now watching Tell the Story Doc on All of Life TV. And yeah, we took a little break. We did no pod November, no podcast all through November. But it's for a very good reason, because now we're coming back with probably the biggest guest of the season. I put on the White Sox hat just for him. But I'm happy to have as a guest in the conversation today, Brian Dye. Y'all give a hand for Brian Dye.
Hey. Aaron, it's good to be here, man. Thanks for the invite.
So what?
Thanks for the invite, man. I feel like a little ant amongst the giants that you've been having on this podcast.
Oh, man, that's not true. That's not true, man. Whenever I started this podcast, I had a vision for what I wanted it to be like. And some of the people who I've had conversations with, and I just wanted those conversations to be heard by the world. And then other people I haven't had as many conversations with, and I just kind of wanted to see what it would be like having that conversation as we record it. And you're one of those people where we've kind of spoken briefly. I've been to a legacy conference. I was up there a couple years ago with Creek Collective, but I've always wanted to hear more about, what's going on with you now and all that you've done in ministry and all of that. If y'all do not know Brian Dye, man, get on Google right now, search his name or whatever, so you can see some of the impact that he has made. But I also always like to share like a personal story. So, man, I seen you from afar, heard your name in so many rooms and all of that stuff, but it wasn't until a couple of years ago where we got to take that tour around Chicago with the Creek Collective. And, man, that blessed me, bro. Like, it really blessed me in a lot of ways. One, because, when I was a kid, my dad always just said, love the place where you are. Right. And, I've embraced that. I've only lived in 3 cities in my life. And what you did for us that day, I think I could do for all 3 of the cities I've lived in, just because, like, man, I love history. I love, like, the places I'm in, and I'm just a lover of place, right? So the fact that you embrace Chicago so much, even right now, is this Chicago Bears hoodie on? Man, that...
No matter how bad we are, I'm representing.
Look, I'm a Carolina Panthers fan, and we're way worse than y'all, way worse. But man, that truly blessed me, bro. For the people who do not know who you are, I'd love for you to just kind of give us a small dose, man. Tell us a little bit about your story. How did you get to where you are right now in Chicago, and just blessing people, man, and helping people see Jesus each and every day? Tell us a little bit about your story.
Wow, man. Yeah, it's always a challenge to know how to summarize everything, right? But this simplest way to tell the story is, I'm a product of Chicago, born and raised there. My grandmother came from Puerto Rico when she was about 17 years old, settled in Chicago in a neighborhood called Humboldt Park, which is a historic Puerto Rican neighborhood in Chicago. That's where I was born and raised. So I'm part Puerto Rican, part white, and so kind of always bounced between a couple different worlds. And but my grandmother, my immediate family, my father was an alcoholic growing up. My mother has fought mental illness, and so me and my 4 brothers, kind of had to figure out life, kind of in other ways. And my grandma was always the rock. Her place was always a safe place for us to go. She always brought us to church, and where we got connected with other mentors. She brought me to a Christian community center where I got connected to mentors. She was just that rock. Every morning when I spent the night at her house, 5 a.m, I'm woken up, by her crying out in prayer in her bedroom for her grandchildren by name. And her life impacted my life. And she never went to seminary, never went to Bible school, wouldn't have been able to answer many theological questions out of the systematic theology books. But she knew the power of the Spirit to transform lives. She knew the power of the gospel. She lived it out. She loved others, and really a product of who I am today. So I've kind of given my life to really model the life of my grandmother, be someone who loves the Lord my God with all my heart, soul, strength, and loves my neighbor as myself as much as I can, and try to get better at that every day. Although, we'll never reach perfection in that. My wife and I have been married for 23 years and no biological kids, but we've always had an open house. So I was just talking to someone yesterday. I feel like one of the overlooked sins, the greatest sins that are overlooked here in America is not following the command to be hospitable.
Yeah.
And where the word hospitable in Greek literally means making a stranger a friend. And so, and that looks different for everybody. But for my wife and I, it's having people at our house for dinner. It's having people stay with us in our guest rooms. And so we do that. We're heavily involved in our community, trying to be present, trying to engage in our community. We live in a disinvested community that many would look down upon. But that's kind of the community that I grew up in and have been called to. And then just been pouring into young people for the last few decades. I'm about to turn 47. I remember the day, I used to think, man, you're 40? It's like, you old, man, Now I'm like, oh. So, but yeah, older by the moment. And, just try to commit my life to investing in people, helping people see their potential. I think of Jesus when he saw Simon. You are Simon, son of John, but you shall be Peter. See the potential in people and walking them to that potential. We've been able to start a conference over the years, Legacy Conference, which has, ministered to, thousands of young adults who've sought to find their place in the church and the kingdom. And so try to build people up as disciples who make disciples. And then locally, we've been able to partner and getting some ministries going. I kind of call myself like a ministry entrepreneur. Some businesses. I kind of envision ministries, and so I've done a little bit of a bunch of stuff. But at the end of the day, man, husband of Heidi, Di, for 23 years, and lover of God, lover of people.
Man, that's awesome, bro. I really love that. I love your story, all that you shared. One thing that sticks out to me, or actually a couple of things, but I'll start with this one. So many of us we catch our faith through like our grandparents that lived it out. And I resonate with what you mean when you say, man, my grandmother probably couldn't have, passed any like theological exam or whatever, but I watched her. And so many people have that story. And I feel like that's a part of the faith being lived out that is not appreciated enough, right? Like we have a culture of like, let's learn. People get on a flight to fly halfway across the country or halfway across the world to learn something. But not many people want to sit and actually observe faith on display every single day. So the fact that you can pinpoint that and say that was a huge part of my development is amazing. Also, like what I noticed is you didn't say like, hey man, this one day I, was sitting on the couch and boom, I came to faith. It sounds like you had just like this progressive understanding that Jesus is Lord, and that commitment, I'm assuming, grew over time. Is that kind of how it went?
Yeah, for sure. And still, right. We're saved in a moment, but we're being saved, right, continuously. And
right.
So yeah, always evolving, always learning, always maturing.
Yeah. I love that, man. I needed that reminder. Quick little tidbit. This is about you, not about me. But for years, I used to say like my dad never really contributed to my spiritual development. And then about 3 years ago, I distinctly remember the Lord bringing back a memory of like my dad on his knees. My dad prayed on his knees every night before bed. And it wasn't long. It wasn't, like I don't remember any, significant piece of it. But it reminded me of that whenever you mention your grandmother and how she poured into your faith in that way. That that example of being the example, is that something you've carried over into this discipleship life that you live, right? Anybody knows Brian Dye is, discipleship. Like there are two people I think about when I hear about disciple making, is you and Sue. So like, did that example, like you seeing the example and then you calling people to follow that example, is that a part of your process in that?
Yeah, I think we often, make ministry more difficult than we need to, right? We kind of sit and wait until we have a program set up, until we have funding, until we have building, so forth. And that's great. There's places for the program, for the budget, for the planning, so forth. Um, but if we simply wait for that, we miss out on a lot of gospel opportunities, right?
Yeah.
Jesus was always ministering on the go. He invited people to come follow him. And, as the disciples go into town to make purchases or whatever, he's waiting at the well, and a woman comes at the well. He's not thinking, oh, I can't wait till the disciples come back with the materials, and then we're going to do this outreach event. And, he could have easily missed out on this opportunity to minister to this woman who, once she realizes that he's the living water, she goes back and is the greatest missionary possible, because she comes from the community. She knows the community, right? And so, again, we just spend too much time as the church, I think, making things way too difficult, way too complicated. It's inviting people, hey, come follow me, come be with me, right?
Yeah.
I remember at around age 12, there was this carpenter by the name of Paul Terry. Paul was coming to the church that I was at, my family was at, and he was relatively newer believer, maybe 3 to 5 years at the time. Kind of a pretty radical transformation in his life, and again, not someone who went to Bible school, not someone who went to seminary, not someone who necessarily had formal ministry, but he would just. I remember Friday nights he would hit me up and like, hey, I'm gonna pick you up at 6 or whatever. We can go play basketball at this park. And well, actually, I was like 12 years old, so I'm not playing basketball. He's playing basketball with older guys, and I'm just sitting on the sideline just watching him. And he's in the middle of the game. He's like, hey, can we do a halftime and do a quick Bible study and share for 3 to 4 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes, and I saw that, and that triggered something in my head, right? It's like, oh, that's what ministry looks like. After church on Sunday, he would invite me over to his house for dinner with him and his wife. Literally the first time I sat down at a dinner table with a family, saw a healthy marriage, in front of me. And he could have taught from Ephesians 5 on, husbands love your wives and so forth. But maybe I would have got it, right? But he modeled it. He showed it. He lived it out.
Right.
And so it's that kind of thing. Again, as you read the Gospels, it's like most of Jesus' ministry was not planned. It was just on the go. So even we've all heard it said, the Great Commission, go make disciples, right? It's not go somewhere else. It's more better interpreted as you're going, make disciples, right? So as you go to work, make disciples. As you go to the mall, make disciples. As you go to the gym, make disciples. As you go home, make disciples, right? Do it on the go.
I love it, man. So I was thinking, I heard somebody say this phrase, bit by the discipleship bug or the disciple making bug. And I know for me, I was exposed to it a few years into my walk with Jesus, right? So whenever I came to follow Jesus, I didn't have anybody to like walked me through a lot. I think now I can understand that I was shaped by a little bit more of like group, what I would call like group formation or group discipleship or whatever. But then when I moved to Memphis, man, discipleship is just such a heavy, like it's everywhere. Like you can't, when you run into somebody in Memphis, they're like, who's like discipling you? Like that's questions that people ask. So like I've
And
always
that's
wondered,
pretty,
like,
let me just interrupt you real quick.
mhm,
That's a credit to a lot of work that Sue Campbell has done, and
yeah,
you know most probably of the listeners won't even know who this guy is because he's not someone who's speaking at large conferences and
mhm,
writing books and everything. He's Southern country, dude. That just is meeting with people at 5 a.m. in the morning, pouring into them. And he's been doing this for decades, and just influenced so many people that his influence, right, has rippled throughout Memphis.
yeah,
And so, people, you could, tell people to look me up, but people need to be Googling Sue Campbell because that's a guy that I've been learning from for the last 20 years,
yeah,
and as much time I could get with him going places, and I try to get that in, but again, just a normal dude.
yeah, yeah. How did you meet Soup?
Yeah, my wife and I have always done youth work, and so we would take students to a camp in Missouri called Kids Across America,
Hmm.
which is an amazing Christian sports camp for students. And so when you take students to Kids Across America or KA, the people who bring the students kind of let the kids go, and the camp has counselors and activity organizers and everything. And so the camp really does a great job in just pouring into the leaders. And so Sue Campbell has been on staff with KA for a long time, and
Yeah.
so him and a spiritual brother of his, Dan Ball, were doing some trainings on disciple making, and even I've heard you kind of bounce between the word discipleship and disciple making, and
Hmm.
you and I kind of know the distinction there, but um, I prior to 20 years ago, I was doing discipleship,
Yeah.
and just my quick understanding of that is discipleship is like a program, right? It's like you're going to do a 6-week study, help people grow as disciples, right? Which is good. Again, that's nothing wrong with that. But my vision was stopped there. It was, let me help Byron, right? Growing his love for God, growing his love for neighbor, so forth. So let me make sure he's fasting, praying, memorizing scriptures, right? Studying them. Um, Make sure that he's, stops looking at porn, whatever the
Hmm.
case is, right? Um, that's short lived. Jesus had the vision, not just for his disciples, though, but for the generations that will come behind them,
Right.
right? And so that's kind of why we use that word, that distinction, rather than just discipleship, which again tends to focus on the individual, is disciple making. It's kind of a generational shift. And so when Soup and Dan Ball were kind of sharing, that stuff, my wife was with me, and we're just like stuck. We're like, that is what we've been missing. We've been doing ministry too short-sighted, you know. Um, so as we pour into Jelani, as we pour into Kevin, as we pour into whoever, right? It's not just about them, but it's about the people now that they're going to reach and pour
Right.
into, right? It's generations to generations, right? As Lecrae says, so the cycles or something like that,
Yeah.
right? It's like, but yes, Sue Campbell, Dan Ball have been two huge influences on my life in that. But really, it's found the line from Jesus,
Hmm.
and Jesus poured into the 12, who poured into others, who poured into others, who poured into others, and 2,000 years later, now we're the fruit of that labor,
Yeah.
right? We're the downline, of that. Um, and the question now is, who's our downline, right?
Yeah.
Uh, my wife and I don't have kids, right? So my bloodline stops with me. But my spiritual line doesn't have to stop with me, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I want people who again are being equipped, encouraged, empowered to continue the legacy that Jesus started.
Yeah. That's good, man. Yeah, you laid a lot of that out perfectly, man. Um, so it's funny you say downline, you talk about, passing through generations and all of that. Because I share with you, I am a part of that because of Soup, right? So it's because Soup spends time with Randy Odom and spent time with Russell McCutcheon and spent time with Hassan Salim. And Hassan Salim spent time with me, that I was brought into this world. And yeah, I've been walking with Jesus and I've been spending time with guys. That discipleship idea wasn't new to me. But, when I sat down at a table with Hassan Salim and Soup Campbell and Herb Hodges at 5 a.m., and I watched Soup be a disciple to Herb and Hassan be a disciple to Soup, and you have no choice. You fall in line, in a sense, and you want to fall in line when you see that displayed. It brought me into a whole nother way. It kind of wrecked my idea of what it meant to be spiritually formed. And as you were talking, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's apostolic, and I was arguing this point that the downline is our, like, another way of looking at apostolic ministry, right? Like, what we learn from the apostles, we pass down, as Paul would say, you entrust to faithful men, right? And you continue in that process of seeing people formed into the image of Jesus. So it's interesting that you brought that up. I remember telling you, I was like, hey man, this is what this is how I was kind of growing up. And you immediately got on your phone and text Soup. It was like, hey, I'm sitting with one of your spiritual grandchildren, in a sense, man. So it's amazing to be a part of that. Um I'm a church planner. And that's one of the ways we met. And here's my biggest challenge. I preached on disciple making 2 weeks ago. I feel like it's one of those things you always have to preach about. And I remember hearing Hassan Salim, Russell McCutcheon pass on what they got from Soup, and Soup saying something like, your ministry doesn't stop with whatever church you're at, right? Like, he was huge on that. He was an elder at our church at the time. But he didn't even view him being an elder of the church as a way to make impact, as much as a way to make connection so that he could make disciples. My question is, for guys like me, and even guys who have like really big churches, how do you like stay tapped in with that disciple making culture? Because we know, like, the more people that come, the longer you're around, the more you're tempted to build this culture of, let's just keep the lights on at the church and keep things exciting. How do you really dedicate yourself to a culture of disciple making for like a church leader like myself?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Good question. So, vision leaks, right? And so you got to keep repeating it, repeating. And, we know that Jesus had kind of a number of topics that he retaught and retaught, right? Over and
Mm-hmm.
over again. The idea of humility, the uh, uh, dying to ourselves and so forth. Like, he just kept repeating those. Sue Campbell, right? If you've heard Sue Campbell teach, you heard the same lesson
Right.
a dozen times at least, right? Because he has 15, 20 lessons he teaches over and over again. And even now, where he's losing his sight, it's like he doesn't need notes, so it's fine. He has all the scriptures memorized and so forth. So I think we just keep repeating it, in conversations, making sure that we're doing it, modeling as well. I think the hard thing is with this, when we talk about disciple making, it's a long-term process, right?
Yeah.
You're talking about 3, 5, 10 years before you're going to see fruit. Um, and, you know, um, we could start a church, get the right band, in place, have the right preacher, have the right lights. You could have 10,000 people there, 5,000, 2,000, whatever, immediately, right? Um, but the problem with that is that you have to keep people with what you attract them to, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times the people who go to those churches are there because great worship, great word, great atmosphere, so forth. Um, it's really tends to be self-focused, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now when you're trying to get those people who came for their own self-interest, right? Um, Now you're trying to make a shift. Oh, go make disciples. It's like this. No, I'm not about that, right? So we have to create a culture where we're recruiting people based on what we want to keep them in, right? And so again, that takes is a slower start, right? As we pour into people, and they pour into people, and they pour into people. That's the power of multiplication as opposed to addition, right? Um, it's not about adding people; it's about multiplying people, right? So that the work of Brian, who could has so many hours in a day, gets multiplied to another person, right? Now I have so many hours in the day; they have so many hours in the day, right? So that's being the influence is being doubled, right? Now I pour into somebody else; they pour into somebody else. Now it's being quadrupled, right? Um, that's what we gotta operate in that frame, right? Now I'm not the kind of guy who, like, oh, they ain't doing the real ministry, they're not doing disciple making, they're just attracting people to their church, and let me write them off, and let me just do a blog about them, and let me just tell people, hey, come to the real thing that's happening over here. It's, man, we all have blind spots. We all have areas we're missing it in, right? Um, and so, I think we need to be people who are seeing the big picture of the kingdom, right? That, man, we all need each other. I have a piece to offer to it, but somebody else has a piece to offer to it as well. And as we now enter into relationship conversations, now we both kind of stretch each other, we build each other up, right? And that's how we all grow. So I've been able to have influence, even just as someone who's relatively under the radar in many circles. Doesn't have a big church, has done planted house churches and so forth. But there's mega church pastors, right, who have seen the work and have seen the fruit of it, have met people who've come through the work, right, who now hit me up and like, hey, help us out, help us figure this out, type thing. And so all that to say is, man, we just got to keep our head to the plow, right? And just keep being faithful, not be concerned about, getting a status, getting clout, getting notoriety. It's not about having 100,000 followers on Instagram or having 5,000 people at our church on Sunday. Let's be faithful. Let's be found faithful,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, I love that.
do that.
Man, I appreciate your charity in that. Because I think it's easy to become polarized. Like, I think it's easy to say, no, only this type of church can do this type of thing.
Yeah.
Because I was gonna ask you, honestly, I was gonna say, like, is there a type of church that seems to be able to embrace this culture more? But I actually, and you can jump in if you want, but I actually do appreciate you being charitable in that.
Yeah, man. What I would say, so I started planting house churches in 2008, and in my mind, I'm like, okay, I'm on this disciple making journey. This is where this is going to be more fruitful, a house church, because you're in small groups, you're able to pour into people in a deeper way, and able to multiply and so forth. And it didn't take me too long to realize people are people. Like,
Mm,
people, we're lazy. We like our privacy. We like our comforts. It's man, the cares of this world choke us all out. You
Mm.
know, if we let it, it really doesn't matter if people come from a mega church or a house church. Like the same realities are set, right? And so again, I say that probably a little too extreme, right? I think there are, in a house church or in a smaller church, right? I grew up in not a house church, but it was a church of 30 to 50 people. It was
Mhm.
kind of a family church in our cities. In the city of Chicago, our average church is like 50 people, right? 75 people. It's
Yeah.
not the 500 or 5,000, right?
Well, that's in the
Um,
nation, actually.
yeah, across the nation, right? And those churches, I think, do have more of a tendency to be able to again influence people, because we influence people again around the table, right? Not around the sanctuary per se.
Mm.
Um, but again, people we're sinners, man. We're selfish. The idea of being hospitable is not something we want to do. The idea of getting up. Soup Campbell, you talk about Soup. This man, 5 a.m., right? People who know him know you come at 5 a.m. If you come at 5:01, the door's locked, right? It's
Right.
like you
I
got to
got
be
shut
there.
out one time.
Yeah. Um, and who wants to get up at 5 a.m. to pour into somebody, right? It's like they're not paying you to do it. You there's no live streaming of it, so forth. But again, when we really want to make influence, when we really want to make an impact, it's the mustard seed, right?
Yeah.
That grows into a tree that the birds nest in now. Um, so it's having again that mindset. So, but yeah, there's no. I don't think there's any perfect model to do it in a church setting or so forth. Uh, but whatever setting we're in, it's how can we get smaller and smaller, right? So if it's a large church, how can we pour into small group ministries, right? How can we um, how can we get around the dinner table with people?
Yeah. Yeah. Our church is fairly small. We fit in that, you know, around 50 window. And we're talking a lot about disciple making right now, for two reasons. One, because whether we get larger or smaller, I want this to be a part of the culture of the people, right? So if we have to shut the church down one day, I want people to say, yeah, but I'm still making disciples. And if we grow to be 1,000 one day, I want everyone to be like, no, if you go to this church, this is kind of the expectation. This is the culture of the church. So I'm trying to figure out how to just kind of engage people in that, because a lot of the people who we have at our church, this is their first time hearing it, And again, if you go to Memphis, I mean, even Chicago, in some places, and then there are probably a few other pockets where you talk to people, even if they're not engaged, they know the idea, right, of disciple making. A lot of times, I'm engaging people who've never even thought of, what it could be like if you're living your life in that way. Um, one of those people being my wife. And this is a good segue, hopefully, because you mentioned earlier that you and Heidi have been married for over 20 years. Has it always been this place where y'all have seen eye to eye when it comes to opening your home, sharing your life, being with people, or has it been like progressive? Like, have you and Heidi just grown in your love for doing this together, or has it been kind of like, let's
Yeah,
take those baby steps?
yeah. Man, we've really been blessed in our marriage. And I know every journey is different, but Heidi, my wife, has an amazing gift of hospitality.
Mhm.
Um, I think I do hospitality out of obedience. She does it out of joy, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, when we got married, we lived in a one-bedroom apartment. So it was a small space. Uh, but, within 6 months of us being married, one of the guys that I was born into since he was a kid, was probably 19 years old at the time, was coming out of jail, needed a place to stay. And so I asked Heidi, can he crash on our couch? She said, sure, and so Darnell crashed on our couch for like 6 months. And then we started doing dinners with some homeless people in the community, because there was a shelter nearby that was really one of those shelters you just sleep there, come at 9 p.m. You leave out at 7 a.m., whatever. And so we started inviting people to our house for dinner, and we had Bible study. And then that led to a guy who lived with us for a year and a half, who was fighting addictions, and we're 23, 24 at the time, young in marriage. But we found that really has strengthened our marriage, because especially when you're in a tight space like that, 1 bedroom, apartment, it's like, if you get into an argument, there's nowhere to hide,
Right.
It's like we have to work stuff out, quickly, because otherwise, we're like, yo, Craig's going to see it. Darnell's going to see it. Right. And, so it forces us, it's a couple who's having an argument in a restaurant versus at home, right? In the private bedroom, it's going to play out differently, right? You're going to be more civilized in the restaurant. And so it kind of puts your marriage in public display, which again sanctifies that marriage. We can't put gloves on, if people are watching. It's like, no, we got to talk this out. So it's been amazing for our marriage. Now we've had people that have lived with us who stretched us, and one of us, is like, okay, it's time for this person to go, and the other person's like, and let's give it a little more time. Sometimes that's me, sometimes that's Heidi. And yeah, God's really been gracious. We just had a student just moved in 2 days ago, that we've known for 10, 12 years. He's probably 19 now, and has made some foolish decisions, and we've tried to talk him out of decisions over the years, and but it, got him in a predicament, and so it's, we had to have the discussion. Do we wash our hands clean, or because again, we've tried and he hasn't been, he hasn't responded, and or do we give another chance? Do we continue to love on him in this way? And so we decided together, after a few days praying independently, to let him move in with us. And we know it's not going to be easy, but again, we know it's not just him though that's going to benefit from it. It's us that's going to benefit from it, as our faith is stretched, as we learn to pray more, as we learn dependent upon God more. God is doing a work in us. So we miss out on the blessing when we don't bless others. Like, we're the ones who lose out, not other people alone.
Yeah. No, that's real. That's real. Man, it's so it's such a blessing to have a partner like that, right? It's almost like, you all are coworkers in the ministry, which is how marriage should work. I believe. I think every pastor, minister, just Christian disciple maker should feel like they have a partner in the ministry. My wife and I are growing in that. We've only been married for 10 years, but we just recently had a young lady live with us for 3 months. And I don't think we ever would have pursued it, but we were like, it was forced upon us. Like, it was a situation we just could not say no to. And after she was launched out to her next thing, we were both just so happy about what the Lord allowed for us to do in that 3 months. So now we kind of get excited about, like, is it something we could do again? And I think my wife is very type A. So she's like, we don't have enough space. We don't have this. We don't have that. We don't know enough. And I think the Lord did that for us so that we could see, like, we don't have to have it all figured out. We already know more than most people would know or be able to do. We have more space than most people would be able to give. So I think that's important for other leaders to hear what you shared earlier. And then also I just kind of add that tidbit that, man, like you just have to live your life. And like you said, as you are going, ensure that those people who God brings into your space, you're intentional with. And
Yeah.
I've seen that from you.
Yeah, and that's why I think Jesus sent out the disciples two by two, and told them, "Don't take any money bag, don't take extra clothes with you." Um, he wants to get us into a place where we're totally dependent upon Him,
Hmm.
right? Again, don't bring plans, don't bring resources. Like, just be faithful. Like, this person needs a place.
Yeah.
Open up your house, right? This person needs discipleship, right? Meet with them, right? And again, those so often we feel tied up because we don't know enough or we don't have enough resources, and again, that keeps us from ministering to that person, but also keeps the Lord from ministering to us. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, go out, no money bag, just go do it,
Yeah.
not knowing how it's gonna happen, but God always makes a way, man. Always makes a way.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me make a shift in the conversation a little bit. So you mentioned this earlier, that after some time you living this thing out, you started a conference, legacy conference. And man, when I first got into ministry, like that's every year people were like, man, you going to legacy, you going to legacy. I didn't even know what legacy was until about maybe 2013, 14, maybe somewhere around there, maybe 15, somewhere.
Yeah.
But man, how did the idea of legacy come about? What did that look like for the people who may not have experienced it at all? Like, what was legacy? How did it come to you? And then how did you kind of expand on that idea?
Yeah. So people see the end result, right? Legacy Conference, for those who don't know, conference that we did in Chicago, 3-day conference, every year, every summer in July. 2,000 people would come from cities across America, even from London and South Africa and so forth. And um, all the Christian hip hop artists, Lecrae, KB, Andy Mineo, the poets, Jack Hill Perry, Preston Perry, Ezekiel, Jeanette, all of them. Um, Preachers from John Piper to Francis Chan to, Tabiti, um, Eric Mason, so it was, you see that and you're like, oh man, that's amazing, but again, it's it was never envisioned to become that. It kind of grew into that. But what it started with really is, you know, uh, my wife and I opening up our house, and so when Lecrae and other artists would come into Chicago to do a concert before they were charging, what they're charging now, and before they were putting up at all these fancy hotels. Like, the church would say, "Hey, we can pay you $250," and but we can't cover, your housing or in hotel or whatever. So we ended up becoming the place where they ended up staying, because at the time we moved from our 1-bedroom apartment, we bought a 6-bedroom house,
Hmm.
in the city. Uh, and so we would always just kind of keep one room open for short-term guests. And so we just built some relationships with some of the artists, and we were all growing in this journey together and disciple making. This is kind of my earlier journey in this, being discipled by Soup and Dan Ball and others. Um, and so they would come do like block parties. We were just do in our neighborhood. We live on the west side of Chicago, which is kind of seen as, again, a disinvested, crime ridden
Hmm.
community. And but so yeah, we just minister, and then we would do some. Did a lot of work with youth ministers, and so we would do workshops and bring Dan Bond, Sue Campbell, Lecrae, teach workshops on disciple making. And so these youth workers would come and they'd be like blown away because they were doing, the junior deacon board, they were doing the youth choir, they were doing, the traditional stuff. And, but this idea of disciple making, this idea of life on life ministry, reproducing into students who could reproduce into others was a new concept for many. And, so that continued just to grow, so we did one workshop like a Saturday and had 50 people at it. And then that grew into 150 the next year. And then I was like, okay, we got something now. People are coming from Grand Rapids and surrounding cities to this. And so then that formed into the Legacy Conference. I remember I was driving a school bus at the time to pay my bills. And I had a break from dropping kids off or whatever, and I'm on the phone with Lecrae, and I'm like, "Hey, man, so you had been part of this kind of momentum that was building." I was like, "What should we call this conference?" And he was like, "Man, it's called Legacy." So the name has nothing to do with me. The vision of a conference has nothing to do with me. It was being faithful with a little bit, again, how can I pour into people? How can I be hospitable? And God started bringing people together who had a common vision and grew this,
Yeah.
So the pandemic hit, 4 years ago, 2020, and we put all the conferences on hold. And we just did a kind of a coming back to life party almost in a way, Legacy Conference Chicago, about a month or two ago, with just about 120 people or so, and intentionally wanted it to be small again, to start laying the foundation. And so we're doing another small gathering in Houston in a week, December 9th. And then next year we're bringing on a conference director, someone who has been coming to the conference for years, a guy in his mid-20s now, Jeff Garcia. And he started coming to the conference when he was like 18 years old, high school, from Miami. Would catch a flight because he was a young believer at the time who wanted community, and knew, he's a little hip hop artist. I should say little. He's a hip hop artist and wanted to connect with his heroes, right? And so he started coming to the conference and got caught onto the vision. Okay, it's not just about the shows. It's about, again, disciple making. And so he moved to Chicago, was discipled for a few years, moved back to Miami. He's doing great work, campus ministry and ministry in the arts and stuff. And so he's coming on to be the conference director. We're looking to have conferences in cities all across the nation and even the world eventually. But the idea is, rather than bringing everybody to one city, what would it look like, again, to multiply in different cities and be a convener for those cities of people with like-mindedness, right? Who, again, are about engaging the community, the broader community, making disciples, sharing the gospel, walk with people to spiritual maturity. So that's where we're at now, man. And I'm excited about what God's going to continue to do.
Listen, this sounds like the House Church Network, but for conferences.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's awesome. Don't forget about Daytona, man. Legacy Daytona can be a thing.
Let's do it, man. Let's do it.
Man, that's awesome, man. I've had the pleasure of coming twice, and it was actually my first time in Chicago. First time I went, so I was, man, it's cool getting to see the artists and the poets, all of that stuff. But man, just sitting down in those sessions and seeing the people who you pick to lead those sessions, because you might be able to get Charlie Dates to lead a session, but a lot of the sessions are led by people who you have discipled and, people who are in your downline and leaders who you trust that are right there local in Chicago. I remember a young brother who I first saw you with maybe 2 years prior to me coming. He was leading a session that I was in at the time. And I was like, man, that's so dope. Cause like, I'm sure you got all these pastors' phone numbers, right, that you could call, and you're like, nah, I know him. I've lived life with him, and I think he can lead this particular thing. So that's an extension of your disciple making at this point. And then I love that y'all had an app. The app was dope. I used to sit and listen to some of those sessions on the app and all that stuff too.
Yeah, I think the app might be defunct now. We got to bring that back to life. But we're trying to keep all the workshops posted there where people could just listen to it at any time. But we again, just man, what does it look like to really pour into other people, right? And when I think of Acts 4:13, when people saw the disciples, right, they saw the power that was happening through them, but then they realized that they were unschooled, ordinary men, but they had been with Jesus, right? That's the key. Finding the normal, everyday people, helping them get connected to Jesus, spend time with Jesus. And it's amazing what God does as we do that, right? So it's not looking for the greatest preacher per se, not looking for the greatest, orator, greatest leader per se, but it's, again, you are Simon, son of John, you shall be, right? And walking with them through that process.
Yeah, I love it. Well, look, man, I want to get you out of here in time, but we always wrap up with some rapid fire questions. The first one is going to be, it might be a little bit tough for you, but give us a short synopsis of your work with the Chicago Partnership, because I know you do work with them and their church leaders there. So tell us about Chicago Partnership.
Yeah, so Chicago Partnership is a collective of churches that attempt to work together and make Jesus visible in every neighborhood of Chicago. So we have a church leadership cohort that I help to lead. And so it's a 3-year process. We have people come in. Year 1 is really open for anyone who's in church leadership to any capacity. So we have pastors who go through it. We have church planners who go through it. We have youth pastors who go through it. We have just lay leaders of churches. And that really focuses on the character of the minister, talk through spiritual disciplines, talk through gospel engagement, so forth. And then year 2 kind of talks more into engaging your community, connecting with people, sharing the gospel, building up disciples, so forth. And then year 3 kind of gets more to the nuts and bolts of the organizational stuff. And so we have, I think this year, about 60 people who are in those, amongst those 3 years groups. And we have 5 church plants that are in process right now of planting in Chicago. And then we do pastor gatherings once a month. And so we're doing one in 2 weeks in Chicago on welcoming the migrants. And so and we've had an influx of particularly Venezuelan immigrants have come to Chicago in the last year, 25,000 now. And so it's kind of causing some tension in our city, because a lot of people are like, man, where are these resources coming for these migrants when we haven't had resource for the people who've been living in the code over the years, right? Or have the schools that have been shut down, or whatever the situation might be. And so we're going to have an honest conversation, man, let's hear from each other, different pockets. And so this is cross denomination. This is cross race. This is cross socioeconomic classes, mega church, house churches. I mean, just everything. And it's just beautiful to see the church, capital C church, coming together. We may have differences on certain views, how to do things, certain views of doctrine and so forth. But, where we do agree, how can we come together to see Jesus made known in the city? So that's the ChicagoPartnership.org if people are interested in checking out more information.
Sounds good. 2 more quick fire questions. I'm not going to ask you about Chicago food because I know people get crazy about that, right? I'm going to ask you, who is your favorite Chicago legend athlete? Who's the greatest athlete to come out of Chicago?
Man, greatest athlete to come out of Chicago. I mean, how can we leave Inglewood out of the discussion here? Um, and the former Chicago Bulls player Derrick Rose. I
Okay.
I think he would be the one. But
Yeah.
there's also most people who aren't from Chicago won't know about Ronnie Fields.
Yeah.
Ronnie Fields was Kevin Garnett moved to Chicago
For
in
Ronnie
high
Field.
school to play with Ronnie Fields.
Yep.
Right? Ronnie Fields ends up getting injured, paralyzed, and so, but Ronnie Fields was that guy.
Yeah.
And I think Kevin Garnett is amazing, but again, Ronnie Fields was at another level. Um, but if I had to pick one, Derrick Rose. If he
Derrick Rose.
if he would have stayed healthy, oh man,
Crazy.
crazy.
I love Derrick Rose. He did some time in Memphis. He's back in Memphis now. So I always love Derrick Rose. All right, last question. Man, we know you know everybody, or at least everybody knows you. Who are some people who you think might enjoy being on this podcast, or you might like to see on this podcast?
Man, my pastor Charlie Dates.
Yeah.
If you could corral his schedule, I'll put a good word in. But Charlie Dates, Derek Puckett, who's the president of the Chicago Partnership, Planter Church Renewal Chicago, amazing multicultural church. Charlie Dates will offer more of the traditional Black church experience.
Yeah.
Derek Puckett, more of the multicultural experience. There's so many. Chicago, we have an abundance. I mean, Eric Rivera is an amazing. He also amazing pastor, also professor at TEDS. He's another great voice. Watson Jones the third, who was planted a church in Philly, took over a traditional church in Chicago, and is getting ready to plant again in Phoenix area.
Oh, wow.
Those are some of my closest friends who I would say, man, get them on.
All right, I'm gonna say Brian told me to tell you. I love it, man. Man, I'm gonna send you off like this. Oh man, 5. I don't know how many years ago. 6 years ago, 7 years ago. We're sitting in Orlando in a church. You open up the Bible, John chapter 1, a lesson that I've taught to so many men that I have discipled. How do you see God, the Lamb of God, right? And you walk through John chapter 1, bless my soul. I wish I had my Bible so I could show you my notes. Thank you for passing that on. As Soup said, you only need a handful of lessons and keep teaching those same things. And when you taught me that, I did share it with a lot of the guys who I get to disciple this day. Man, I appreciate you. May the Lord continue to allow you to make an imprint on men and women for the sake of the gospel, and so the men and women can grow to look more and more like Jesus Christ. Again, check out Brian Dye on social media, Vision Nehemiah on Instagram, legacydisciple.org, is it?
Yes.
And then also check out Chicago Partnership. Thank y'all for watching. Tell the story, Doc, and don't forget to live all of your life in Jesus Christ. God bless.